Again, you have to be a little careful about what the lingo is. There's a buyer of insurance, and there's a seller of insurance. Okay. We think of the buyer as being long a swap and short credit risk. All of these are equivalent, we're going to see. Okay. This is what confuses people, is long, short, whatever, but we'll see the balance sheet structure and we'll understand right now. So the balance sheet structure, think about this person as somebody who owns a corporate bond, a risky corporate bond. Okay. That's before we do any swaps or anything like that. That's their exposure. Okay. They then can issue a treasury bond. They can buy a treasury bond and go short a corporate bond. And I'm going to put that in brackets. Okay. If they went short the same corporate bond and long a treasury bond, you see now their net exposure is that of a treasury bond, right? If they then went short a treasury bond and long a treasury bill, their net exposure would now be a treasury bill. We've seen last time, okay, that this sort of deal here, being long this fixed rate thing and short flexible rate thing, that's an interest rate swap. Okay? This is a credit default swap. In intuitive sense, I'm going to get more clear about exactly what a credit default swap is, but you're taking this treasury. The important thing is that this treasury bond is the same maturity as the corporate bond. Okay, so all you're really doing is carving off the credit risk here. The net of these two things is the credit exposure. It's that 530 basis points that we're talking about here. Okay, if we wrote that as a swap, we would write it, here. Okay, long a swap. Okay, but short credit risk, okay, because the corporate bond is on this side. Your short credit risk. That's why it's a hedge for the risky exposure here. Okay, because the original exposure is long credit risk, and so you want to have a swap, a credit default swap, in order to hedge that credit risk. I'm being a little careful about the balance sheets here. It's all consistent in this course. It's not consistent the way people do it in the real world. Some people do it off balance sheet or whatever. But whenever we're talking about a hedge, we think of that as a contingent asset. And so I put that on the asset side. So even though that is a long exposure in credit risk, and that's a short exposure in credit risk, they're both listed as assets. Okay? And you won't get confused as long as you keep remembering what the underlying notional swap of IOUs that's going on here. All right. Now, if we think about their counterparty, okay, this is a counterparty who just is on the other side of these things, right? So okay, and that is a CDS and an interest rate swap, which we're going to book as contingent liabilities. So this is the seller of insurance. They're long credit risk. They're short the swap. Okay, so this language is consistent. We're treating CDS and IRS the same. The lingo is the same, and the way we book them on the balance sheets is the same for the risk exposure. It's just a different risk. It's credit risk as opposed to interest rate risk. You can see here that credit default swaps are not some weird exotic creature of Wall Street, okay? They're a pretty simple conceptually, okay? The devil's in the details, of course, but conceptually, they're just not that different from interest rate swaps. They're not that different. And interest rate swaps are just not that different from standard banking business, borrowing short and lending long. You know, they're just not that different. So these are in some sense the essence of banking, where you have this swap of IOUs and you've gotten rid of all the notionals. You know, as Fisher says, only one of these people is actually transferring any money, okay? The others are just transferring risk. They might have to put up some collateral, he says, in order to, as a margin for this risk exposure, to ensure performance.